Longtime viewers of mine will know that my favourite Doctor is Peter Davison as the Fifth Doctor. And longtime viewers will also know that maybe because of that, I treat his Big Finish releases a little bit harsher. I think that some of his more recent ones have been a little bit mixed. I liked 42. I liked most of Conflicts of Interest. So it was with In the Night that I approach it with a little bit more trepidation. We've got two stories here. We've got Pursuit of the Nightjar by Tim Foley, and we've got Resistor by Sarah Grijalva. And I also discovered through the behind-the-scenes features that I have been pronouncing Sarah's last name wrong. I apologise. I'm famously uncultured as well. Long-time viewers will know that of me as well. So, this is a release that stars Peter Davison as the Fifth Doctor, Janet Fielding as Tegan, and Sarah Sutton as Nyssa. We are firmly in Season 20 territory here. We've got Pursuit of the Nightjar by Tim Foley, a four-parter, which sees the Doctor, Nyssa and Tegan arrive on the ship called the Nightjar, which is piloted by Captain Goban, played by Paul Thornley, who is on a charity aid mission to get aid to a planet in need, and those events will cascade into a series of historical events that will ultimately result in universal peace. And it is a story that the Doctor holds very, very close to his heart. The story of the Nightjar, which he recounts to Tegan and Nyssa. Let's play a clip from Pursuit of the Nightjar.
Would you look at that?
So what's... Whoa, that's quite the view. It's magnificent. Such brilliant blues.
These are the astronauts. Listen, they're one of the few phenomena you can hear in space.
Wow. How?
It'll take me hours to explain the fundamentals. The gravitational waves combined with the vibrations of space algae along with the...
you know what? Don't bother. But it's beautiful.
And that beauty comes at a cost. This is a tricky region to navigate. These knots, the brightest bits, they're effectively micro black holes.
Black holes?
But not nearly as strong or destructive. Think of it as pockets of glowing quicksand in space.
Oh, much more reassuring. Should we be flying so near them?
Usually not, no. But we're in the finest of ships, with the finest of pilots.
You know where we are.
All this, it matches the accounts. If I'm right, oh, and I hope I'm right, this is one of the greatest ships in the universe.
Go on.
It's called the Nightjar, on a voyage of mercy, delivering vital supplies to the planet Ottima, a colony world displaced many light years away.
How does a planet become displaced?
Well, it's caught up in a devastating war. Physically, we're far away from all the fighting, but mentally, the whole universe is consumed by it. Captain Goban, at the helm of this ship, flies solo for nearly 3 years through perilous regions of space to reach that planet and deliver this aid. And in doing so, he doesn't just save Ultima. Oh no, this is an act of bravery that reverberates throughout the cosmos, stunning both sides and eventually bringing to an end the conflict.
That's quite the story.
It really is. If this is the Nightjar in the final seam of the astronauts, he can't have much further to go.
Look at you.
What's wrong?
You're as giddy as a schoolboy. You know the story of the Nightjar rather well.
Yes, you could say that. And that's a story in itself.
So this is essentially the Doctor meeting his hero. And, you know what they say about meeting your heroes. It's maybe a little bit more complicated than you'd think. Because it's a little bit difficult to get into this story, Pursuit of the Nightjar, without getting into, like, minor first act spoilers. So if you want to have the spoiler-free version, stick around, but I will go a little bit more in-depth later on. Pursuit of the Nightjar, though, TLDR version, is a phenomenal four-part adventure. Tim Foley has created a story that is simultaneously super tense, super dramatically substantial, but also a story that has incredible optimism and joy, some real, like, fist pump in the air moments of victory and triumph that I loved listening to every single goddamn second for it. You've got these characters here, Captain Goban, played by Paul Thornley, and also the captain of the Nemesis, which is following the Nightjar, Captain Eslo, played by Fenella Woolgar, who is essentially Goban's nemesis, that it's in the name. And they have this sort of flirtatious rivalry, and each episode opens with a communication that has been recorded between these two adversaries, sort of like lightly teasing each other, because the nemesis wants to try and catch up with the Nightjar in order to take the humanitarian aid, but maybe Eslo's heart is not really in it, and she just enjoys the chase and the adversarial relationship with Goben. It's not exactly the super complex dynamic here, but for a 4-part story, for an adventure of this type, it is substantial enough to really sort of have these emotional beats hit like a jackhammer when they need to. And Tim Foley has done such a great job at making this an exceptionally well-paced adventure as well. It's essentially kind of like a bottle episode. It is a very small cast of characters. We've got the Doctor, Nyssa Tegan, and then Eslo and Goben, and that's it. We have these sort of weird timey-wimey spectres that are damaging the Nightjar ship, and then ultimately they start to damage the Nemesis, but these are some sort of more ethereal creatures that aren't given a voice, aren't really given a proper form, and they're just there to keep the stakes high. But there are still moments of just pure joy over the course of this 4-parter, and I loved listening to this. Pursuit of the Nightjar is my favourite standalone story that Big Finish have released in 2023 so far. And it is an absolutely outstanding, terrific achievement from Big Finish, from everybody involved. The performances are absolutely top-notch as well. I love what they do with Tegan over the course of the story, how she just hates everything to do with space at the beginning, but then towards the end she really starts to enjoy the dangerous beauty of the cosmos. It's absolutely superb. If you want a slightly more spoiler-filled version, stick around. If not, come back when I show this on screen again, okay? I'm just going to go fully webcam for this conversation, and then when I start talking about the next story, Resistor, I'll bring this back up again. So if you want to have me muted, feel free. But, okay, so this is a Don't Meet Your Hero story, because you've got the 5th Doctor here, who basically almost worships Captain Goben like a little fanboy. He even has a figurine of the Nightjar spaceship in the TARDIS library, and Tim Foley, the absolute madman, actually included the Easter egg of the Nightjar spaceship in one of his previous 11th Doctor releases from the other year. Oh my god, what a wonderful Easter egg there. But the reason that the Doctor holds this story in such high regard is that when he first left Gallifrey, it was one of the first stories that he heard, and Susan actually told him the story and gave him the model. It's something that inspired him to be a better person and to travel the universe, and, this is one of the stories, this is one of the moments in history that he's always wanted to explore, but he didn't want it ruined for him. He arrives, and at the end of part 1, Captain Goben dies. And now he has to get the Nightjar to its destination. But the forces that killed Goben are now basically trying to tear the ship apart. History has gone a bit wibbly, and the Doctor is kind of running out of options and leaves him in a hopeless and despairing situation. It is a wonderfully dramatically loaded story. Peter Davison gives one of his best performances as the 5th Doctor since, probably for a long time at least. Not to say he's not been terrific in other stories. He was great in 40 Part 2, but he is exceptionally good here as the guy who starts the story as the optimistic young fanboy, and then just has that hope of a brighter tomorrow, of the hero that he worshipped growing up, just battered and beaten away over the course of the story. But Nyssa gets some wonderful scenes as well, including basically what amounts to a monologue midway through about growing up on Traken and how alone she felt and how she relates to Captain Goben. And then you've got the ending as well, which has a sublime title drop, an incredibly, wonderfully, emotionally impactful ending that is very uniquely Doctor Who, as in not many other TV shows could get away with an ending like that, because it would have to revolve to bullets or conflict or explosions and stuff. But Doctor Who, not that type of show, and it worked so outstandingly well. Pursuit of the Nightjar is an absolute triumph for all involved. I think that it's one of Big Finish's best releases in a long time, certainly their best release of 2023 so far. Tim Foley's done an incredible job. Janet Fielding is also so much fun here as just the exasperated Australian companion, but yeah, the cast are great. Paul Thornley has a pretty small role. Like I said, he doesn't really make it out of Act 1, but he is so charismatic and he carries that first story so well, and it's a story that really informs the Fifth Doctor's character and really challenges him. It challenges the idea of what it means to be the type of traveller that he is and how far he has to push himself and really who he is deep down. And it was wonderful. Loved everything about it. Pursuit of the Nightjar is like 10 out of 10. Peak Doctor Who. Can't praise it enough. Listen to it immediately. So it seems like we've got quite a hard act to follow with Resistor by Sarah Grahala. Now, this is set in communist Poland in the early 1980s, where you've got a punk band called Resistor, and one of their band members, the drummer specifically, is taken away by a suspicious black car. And because the Doctor, Tegan and Nyssa just happened to be there, they were meant to be in another country entirely visiting Tegan's grandmother. Didn't happen. TARDIS isn't going to take them anywhere that they want to go. They end up getting involved. Let's play a clip from Resistor.
I saw it with my own eyes. There was this awful sound and a blinding flash. I think something terrible's happened to him. We have to find him, right now.
We're on in 15 minutes.
We should cancel.
We're not cancelling. This is our big break. It's what we've been working for.
We can't go on without Hal.
Why not? There's got to be someone who plays the drums around here.
And can learn our set in 10 minutes.
Excuse me, did you say you were looking for a drummer?
Eh?
Doctor, you're not serious.
You play the drums?
Well, not exactly the drums, but I did play the vibratorosum as a child.
What?
Oh, it's basically the same thing.
It's more cymbals, less drums.
I'm a quick study, and I always rather wanted to be in a band.
Doctor, is this a good idea?
It's certainly not a bad one. These people appear to be in trouble, and I'm in a position to help them out.
Always assuming you won't make things worse.
You think you can learn our whole set in 10 minutes?
I might need a little longer than that.
I'm sure Pavel would let us push back 30 minutes.
What about curfew? People have to get home by 10.
So we cut a few songs.
And Hal?
Hal wouldn't want us to miss our chance.
No, you're right. He wouldn't.
I better go and find Pavel. Let him know what's going on. Sorry, I didn't catch your name.
I'm the Doctor. This is Nyssa.
Hello.
And Tegan.
Hi.
I'm Roman. This is Isa. And we're Resistor.
2/3 of Resistor.
Delighted to meet you.
Are you famous? Sure, I've heard of that name before.
Hardly. This is pretty much our first gig.
And if it wasn't for you, it might not have even been that. Welcome to the band, Doctor.
So you can probably tell from that clip and the premise of the story, we've got something very, very different to Pursuit of the Nightjar. And that's good. I like box sets that go like polar opposite directions. Pursuit of the Nightjar was a far future, dramatically loaded, timey-wimey story. And Resistor is a two-part story, half the length, and also the episodes are a bit shorter as well. They're like 20-25 minutes long, of the Doctor landing in Warsaw in a communist country where there's a bunch of superstitious events happening. And Sarah, in the behind the scenes, which were really fascinating, she comes from a Polish family, so she has researched and heard a lot about these sort of urban legends in 1980s Poland, including but not limited to the black car that I mentioned earlier in the synopsis, but also the flickering street lamps, which are allegedly meant to be Morse code. But basically, it's a really fun way of co-opting those myths and saying, what if it was aliens? And on that level, this is a really fun story. It's not a game-changing story. It's not super dramatically impactful. There's a few character beats that felt like a little bit, like it was trying a little bit too hard to go for the shorthand. Like, this character has this particular trait, therefore immediate sympathy, which, you know, sometimes can work, and I understand why it happened in this story, because it's only a two-parter. There's a lot of historical context that you need, because I don't think that many people will know about communist Poland in the early 1980s and the secret police and everything that was happening there. There's also a really funny subplot happening over the course of it where Tegan gets kidnapped and she's trying very, very hard to convince them that she is actually an Australian, and then she's an Australian citizen and she can't be treated like this. Really, really fun stuff. So, and of course it opens with the Fifth Doctor in a band, which is really fun because Peter Davison, don't you know, before he pursued a career in acting, really wanted to be in a rock band. So that sort of metatextual element to the Fifth Doctor is a lot of fun. The problem with Resistor is that there's not really an awful lot to it, beside the whole, what if these myths from the 1980s got co-opted in Doctor Who, and it was aliens the whole time. I think that the alien threat at the end could have been a bit more interesting. I don't think it needed the sort of like twist where the alien is trying to be really, really threatening and intimidating, but then it turns out it's much more sympathetic than you. I think you maybe could have skipped that angle. Maybe you could have built up the whole the myths and everything, the perception of it from the outside, and then it turns out it was a whole misunderstanding, rather than have that weird like middle chapter. I think it kind of bogged the story down a little bit. But like I said, the main issue with Resistor is that it follows Pursuit of the Nightjar, and that's not anyone's fault. It's just, you go from, for example, in Series 6, and I know that's not the order of the stories, but for Series 6, you've got The Girl Who Waited. Then imagine the week after, you go to Night Terrors. Both are good stories, but we're playing with different levels here. Resistor is a really fun 1980s conspiracy thriller with an alien twist. And that's kind of all it is. But it's got some great texture to it. Its characters are fun. Performances are really strong. This is the one where I think this is actually a really good box set generally for Janet Fielding. Like, she's so good in Pursuit of the Nightjar, and she's also just a lot of fun in Resistor as well. This is like the Tegan Power Hour, but it's like 2 stories and much longer than an hour. If you're a big fan of Tegan, In the Night is like a must listen. But generally, this is a really good box set. This is probably the best 5th Doctor box set that I've listened to since I started reviewing Big Finish on these live streams. In the Night is a really great duet of stories. Really great stuff. They complement each other in pretty fascinating ways, in that they are polar opposite stories in both tone, approach, and setting and everything. But I like box sets that do that. I really appreciate them when they do go from like a timey-wimey space drama to 1980s Warsaw communist thriller. I love it when Big Finish do that. But yeah, In the Night is so good, and Pursuit of the Nightjar, if I need to say it again, is my favourite Big Finish story of 2023 so far. And you know how much I hold the 5th Doctor in like personal fan esteem, so if I'm recommending this, I think that really says something. So In the Night, really good. Pick it up and listen to it immediately.